Hello, everybody, and welcome to our partnership event with Ericsson, Negotiating for Flexibility in the Workplace. My name is Sabrina Ho. I'm the founder and CEO of Half the Sky, Asia's leading career platform for women. Thank you all so much for being here, and I would also like to thank the audience joining us today from 23 countries. We're so excited to be partnering with Ericsson on this great panel, Negotiating for Flexibility in the Workplace. Our new partnership with Ericsson will provide meaningful opportunities to our community, as Ericsson is a company who walks the talks in uplifting women in the workplace, and they are committed to provide the support and infrastructure to women during their career life cycle. Today's discussion topic, negotiating for flexibility in the workplace, has increasingly become important as we're moving towards the new world of work. And as an employee, you may all wonder how we can start having the conversation around wanting more flexibility at work. In the following conversation, leaders from Ericsson will share personal experience and practical tips on how to initiate the conversation with your current or future employers around the ask for flexible working arrangements. I'm very looking forward to learning from the speakers. And without further ado, I will pass the floor to our amazing moderator and speakers from Ericsson.
Before we begin, a quick introduction of myself. My name is Amita Onni. I'm a Client Services Director at Runstart Sourceright. And Runstart Sourceright is a global RPO service provider. We specialize in talent acquisition and talent management solutions. So we partner with organizations such as Ericsson to deliver their talent acquisition strategy. Now, this event, the topic of negotiating flexibility in the workplace, is being held in partnership with Ericsson and Half the Sky. Half the Sky, a little bit about them. Half the Sky, their mission is to increase female representation at every level. So they work with companies such as Randstad, Sourceright, and Ericsson, who are really committed to growing women leadership representation within their organizations. And Ericsson is a very well-known brand. Ericsson enables communication service providers to capture the full value of connectivity. Ericsson's portfolio spans business areas such as networks, digital services, managed services, and emerging business. So we have some great partnership and some great topics to talk today. Now, before we start with the panel discussion, let me take a few minutes to share with you what we want to cover and what can you learn from this session. And I'm going to start with the obvious, the pandemic. Our ways of working because of COVID-19, as I'm sure everyone will recognize, has evolved. And in my personal opinion, the evolution actually started before the pandemic. But what COVID-19 did was really accelerate the change in the way we work. So now on one side, we have what is really important to employees, and that's constantly changing, that will allow them to cope with this external environment. And on the other hand, you have organizations and governments looking to meet that demand. So hence has to change constantly. Let's look at this at a macro level, at a country level. In Singapore, a survey in early 2021 of 186 Singapore-based employees spanning 19 sectors found that 71% of employees recognize the positive impact of equality, diversity, and inclusive initiatives. 71% is quite high. And what that data tells us is ED&I is important to employees. If you look at another study that was conducted by Kantar Inclusion Index covering 24 industries, also in Singapore, 44% of staff, interestingly, reported that they are affected by stress and anxiety at the workplace. Now, if you compare that 44% figure to the global average, which is 39%, Singapore is on the high end. Let's look at India, for instance. I came across an article as part of this research actually about how work from home started off as this novel idea and giving people a chance to spend time with their families, introspect, and pursue hobbies. And interestingly, the article goes on to talk about how work from home is not a novel concept anymore. A consulting psychiatrist from Wockhardt Hospital is quoted to say that the number of work from home related stress and anxiety has risen by 30% compared to when India first went into lockdown. And she talks about the concept of productivity shame and hence people working longer hours. You turn your attention to Japan. The work from home and the pandemic has really called into question some very well-established ways of working for big and small businesses. An example of that is Kiran Holdings, which is a beverage group. They plan to stop paying allowances for employees to commute and instead began to offer remote work allowances. So, all of this data and report, what it is actually telling us is whilst the government, the organizations we work for, the employees are creating ways to address this changing environment, the common thread here, interestingly, is change. And the status quo on how we work is constantly being challenged and requires evolution. So here we at Ericsson thought, okay, it's a really good time to discuss that topic. Despite general perception, I think the key message here is also negotiating flexibility in the workplace impacts everyone. So in today's discussion with the panelists, whom I will introduce shortly, we will talk about the how, the why, the where of negotiating flexibility in the workplace. And it is going to be backed up by personal and professional experiences of our panel members. In today's session, you will hear from the panel members about how flexibility is not only designated for a certain gender with childcare responsibilities, and the reason a person could request for flexibility can be varied and all valid. Secondly, you will hear about how do you initiate a conversation? How do you find your voice on this topic? We will explore the emotions that sit behind it and sometimes the blind spots we're often unaware of. The third and an interesting topic we'll cover is the business impact of flexibility. Where is flexibility supporting the business and where sometimes it isn't? What are some of the key considerations, particularly for the managers in the audience, when making a decision to either offer or not offer flexibility? And lastly, how do you know what you're entitled to? Organizations have put in time, effort, and resources to build a flexible working environment, particularly with the current situation, that encourages people and provides them with the benefits. But what does it actually mean to do your research before having that conversation with your manager? So that's what you're going to hear from us today. And with that, let me welcome our panel members and maybe quickly introduce them as well. So we have three people from Ericsson as our panel member. I'll start with Lakshmi. Lakshmi Sajeev is based in India, Gurgaon, as an account manager at Ericsson, a graduate from IIM Calcutta, and as I understand, comes from Kerala. And for those of you who don't know, Kerala is known for palm-lined beaches and backwaters. Lakshmi likes trying new things, and the pandemic has actually helped Lakshmi pick up several hobbies, isn't that right, Lakshmi? Such as digital illustration, you were saying, pottery, music, gardening, naming a few. We then have Andrew. Andrewerton currently leads the transformation journey to position Ericsson as a leader in private cloud infrastructure and application space. Now, Andrew, I understand you have two daughters, 9 and 12, I believe, and they're junior black belts and taekwondo experts, and they're also experts in active negotiation and powerful persuasion tactics to get your attention. That must be quite fun. Andrew also has a Queen's Commission in the Royal Australian Infantry, which has provided some unique perspectives, I would imagine, on your leadership style. And in your spare time, Andrew, remind us, what do you do?
Actually, in my spare time, I actually try and plan what I should do in my spare time when I actually have some. So it's
lovely, lovely. Thank you for that. Wonderful. And finally, we have Ivy here. Ivy is our Customer Program Excellence Director for digital services at Ericsson. She's based in Singapore with almost 16 years experience in sales marketing across several industries. Ivy, again, a mother of two, and Ivy, your kids are into TikTok and aspiring foodies, which is brilliant. I love that. And I think you mentioned during the pandemic, you and your family took to cookbooks and recipes. And remind me, Ivy, which was your favorite family show?
Somebody Fits Phil. If you
that.
haven't watched it, go on Netflix. It's really interesting. It's a
There
very
we
funny
go.
piece.
Netflix recommendation right there for you. Thank you, Ivy. And Ivy, please, I have to share this, but I understand that you enjoy running, but also is there a secret you'd like to share with us today about yourself?
Yeah, it's very rare to come from a lady, but I actually really like whiskey, and I have probably 70 bottles at home as my personal collection, and still accumulating. Yeah,
Still accumulating. Lovely.
yeah.
No, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourselves, everyone. Great. So with that, let's maybe, again, welcome panelists, and I would like to sort of move into the topic. Now, at the start of this session, we started with the obvious, the pandemic. So I'm going to keep to that same vein. And Lakshmi, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about how the pandemic has changed the ways of working at Ericsson? What are some of the changes you have observed, and how have you adapted to these changes?
Hi everyone. So I graduated in March 2020 and I was really looking forward to joining the company. So excited about a new job, learning new things, meeting new people, and being in a new city, fresh out of college, you can imagine. And suddenly the entire country sort of goes into lockdown, and there's the state of like panic and uncertainty over how the onboarding is going to be and how the joining formalities are going to be. So I joined in June with Ericsson, and I had a whole virtual onboarding. And those are the things that I was excited about, meeting people, working face to face, did not happen. I was meeting people over Zoom calls. I was having blocking calendars to introduce myself rather than having those informal conversations over a cup of coffee. So that was something entirely new to me. And especially I'm in a client facing role. So building new relationships, developing trust is hard when you're not in the vicinity of people, or you're not able to share that space with people. So I did face a lot of challenges there, and I was trying to figure out how to sort of navigate this. um, but something that I picked up was I tried making sure that I'd always like, it's just little things that you could do. So schedule calls with my team, one on one, just to sort of introduce myself, tell them about what I'm doing, what I'm working on, get to know about the things that they're working on, the projects that they're working on, the opportunities that they're working on. And sometimes I'd even just call up just to check in on them, see what they're up to, how their family is doing, just to make sure that everyone's all right. And I still keep doing those things. So um, I think that has sort of helped me create a bond with my team and even with the client, just checking in on them and making sure that they're doing all right. And if there's something that I can do to sort of help them out. So yeah,
Thank you. Yeah. Wonderful. I think that's something that a lot of people will resonate with the virtual onboarding that you talked about. And Ivy, how about you? How have things changed at Ericsson for you with the pandemic?
Well, for me, interestingly, with this pandemic, I know my kids love me, but with this pandemic, I think they really love and miss me, because we all work from home, right? In the office, you are like, you can take your space and you can concentrate and do your stuff without disturbance. You can choose not to hang out with your colleague if you have something urgent. But when you're at home, there's no way. They will keep coming to you, ask for this and that. And not the kids, everyone will come to you when you're at home. So that's something lovely but very different that you have to manage.
Wonderful, wonderful. Andrew, any comments from you on that?
Look, I think no, it's really good sharing from Ivy and Lakshmi here. And I think they've covered quite a lot of the key points there. So nothing extra to add there, Amita.
Wonderful. Okay. Now, the other thing is, as part of research for this particular topic, actually, interestingly, I came across a Mercer study, and this year, the Mercer study showed that 70% of companies said they were planning to adopt the hybrid model of working and allow for more flexible options. So, with this data in mind, and Andrew, this question is really for you to begin with. Have you seen any noticeable changes in the flexibility initiative specifically at Ericsson? And what has been the impact in terms of client-facing customer relations?
No, I think it's a good point actually, and yeah, the data says what it is, and I think the transition from the previous to now, I think it's been quite pronounced. But we as humans tend to adapt to that very quickly, and perhaps take a few moments to reflect. Ericsson itself has transformed quite rapidly, and these days we're not sort of so much talking about flexibility, but about balance, because what's happened is that the flexibility has actually changed the balance of the work that we do and the interactions that we take. And if I give you an example, if we sort of all take a moment to step back in time and say even before the pandemic, our daily routines were pretty set. Most of us would commute we'd end up at the office or at the customer site. We'd have meetings. We'd have those in meeting rooms. We'd schedule them. We'd meet face to face. For those who are not in the same countries, yes, there'd be a little bit of online things like that. So fine, that's not a problem. But then almost overnight, this situation changed. I mean, and there was a lot of, from a personal perspective, a lot of questions around, is our industry going to change? Are we going to stay in business? Will they shut certain things down? Because we're seeing in the community and family units and things like that, people losing jobs, industries changing because, that whole movement cycle, the whole face-to-face thing became, just disappeared overnight. And what I saw from there is that our world went online, especially in the telecommunications sector. And then what did that mean though? And we talk, okay, flexible. Everyone was happy. Yeah, we still got our jobs. We can continue to work. We're an industry that can keep going. But what was slow then became fast, right? And what was, I think, limited by, the human interaction, the time it takes to travel, commuting, all that sort of stuff, the waiting time, actually became a floodgate of, I think, flexibility, if you want to call it that. So there were options. We had tools, we had the means, we had work from home policies, all of these things coming up, but they come up at a price as well. So sharing a little bit more on that is that instead of commuting from home to the office, we're commuting from bed to desk, right? And I think that was where the digital destruction started to apply, because the flexibility, which I think was inherent, we enabled people to work from home, which previously wasn't like that, suddenly became, I think, a little bit of a bane, because we had flexibility, but we didn't have necessarily the ability to ring fence all of that. So what was the original dream of working from home? Because everyone said, I want to work from home 5 days a week or 3 days a week or something like that, actually started to become a little bit of I would say, a weight around people's neck, because with the flexibility that afforded with, we have furniture, we have ability to connect online, our customers were adopting this. We actually removed a lot of the barriers that were, I guess, slowing things down, but then we became always on. Enablement and the work from home and the flexibility of all that, I think, is all there. What then comes from here is that we're now bringing stuff into our homes, into our lifestyles, and the impact of that is very human. And so, yes, flexibility, I think, is adopted by our entire industry, to be fair. Our customers contacting us anytime, all of the time. Our people are now communicating more efficiently, more effectively, and more often, and into the different times of the day. So it is a little bit double-edged. Touching on the question around impact on customer, though, and it's a story. I had one of my sales team come to me. He said, I have dropped my engagement with my customer. I said, why? He said, oh, because I'm a coffee person. I need to meet people face to face so I can build a relationship. And then I feel more comfortable to ask them questions and get information to help support them. So in some ways, this flexibility, this online, actually disabled some people because they felt that the humanness was so lost, and therefore they were not able to meet new people, and they could only deal with the people that they knew. So it's an interesting experience that I saw across the board for this change, and the flexibility didn't always bring a positive outcome. And I think that the discussion around it is how we harness that flexibility to make it, work for us and take those opportunities.
I must say, Andrew, you've made a very good point earlier on to say, is it about flexibility or is it about balance? I think that's where we're trying to figure things out, aren't they? So that's a really valid point. Ivy, anything more to add on that from you, or Lakshmi from you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about Andrew talks about, from bed to desk rather than from bed and then to office. Because, my kids like TikTok, right? And they have a lot of creators creating content based on this. It's not from bed to desk, it's bed to bed. And literally they are constantly there. It gives you so much flexibility that sometimes you need to know where the balance is. Otherwise, that's where the well-being questions come in. Yeah, so that's I think a good point to highlight.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing for the audience to consider. What is it that you're looking for? Flexibility, or having that conversation about balance with your organization, with your employer. And that's something you can answer for yourself before you actually have that conversation. Really, really valid point. Thank you. Now, I'm going to continue to use the word flexibility for the purpose of this, but requesting flexibility, one of the things we've come across is often, I think there's a perception that it can be for childcare. That's when people request flexibility. And it's often pigeonholed into a particular gender that might request flexibility. And also there's thoughts and, a lot of conversations around, is the reasons you're asking for flexibility conventional or unconventional, and are they valid? So with that in mind, Ivy, just a question for you. Was there a time when you were working with any of your previous employers even, that you had to ask for flexibility, and what were the reasons and what was the impact? If there's an experience you can share, that would be really useful.
Yeah. Well, looking back at my previous workplace itself, I think I've been very blessed because I've been working more of a regional role and I've been traveling. And I don't recall that flexibility was an issue in the past for me. But that was also pretty much due to my work nature in the past, sales and marketing. We do late setup, we work overnight, and it kind of culture for this kind of companies to allow a bit of flexibility because you need that long hours and extended effort. So back then it wasn't, and also recalling back then I was single, I don't have that much commitment, and the kind of flexibility I need is probably coming in later, going earlier. Just minor little things, not like life damaging or kind of flexibility. So it wasn't an issue at the past. Um, and when I joined Ericsson 4 years back, I was the regional manager, event manager, and I was traveling around the region as well. So coming back to the question, did things change much for me? Honestly, not really, because I'm working in the region. I don't see my counterpart. I don't see the people I work with physically. We work remotely. So it's always on the phone, always on the laptop. We are always communicating through video comms, So that's pretty norm to me. The only difference is I have to stay home. That's what I shared earlier. But things kind of took a change somewhere down a few years back. I was traveling so much. The company was fantastic. My team was really supportive. We are encouraged to take off in lieu and to rest, but still, time away from family with such young kids. The kids constantly tell me that they don't see me. So when I'm not traveling, I'm in the office. You recall that we have to go to the office, right? So yeah, they don't see me at home. They see me leave early when they step off to school, and they see me coming back when they're about to go to bed. So they don't see me, and because of that, as anyone with young kids, the mom guilt comes in place. I really think that I can't change the fact that I need to travel and do work, but can I do something when I'm here in Singapore? So I start to think about how I can work smarter, how I can speak to my manager and my team, if I could okay for me to work from home for a few days in a week. And that was pre-pandemic time. So that was even before COVID period. It's all based on the balance need, individual feel about it. And the team was very supportive. So even before COVID, I was working like 2 days from home. But the work hours stays the same. You start at the same time because I connect with the team over email. So that was perfect. Um, but then things doesn't turn very well later on as well. Some huge family issues, and I took a 2 months break. Yeah, to handle some family issues, and I was very glad that Ericsson actually gave me that understanding and allowance for me to take this break to sort things out. But it's not done just by asking. There is communication, that there is trust that needs to be in place, because when I step off, somebody has to step in to do my job. So before I asked for it, I thought about it, and when they were okay to give it to me, we worked out a plan. So the plan has to be in place for the rest to come in, the structure, everything has to be there. So there's a bit of work there. But once that's done, you're off to do your stuff, nobody disturb you till you're ready to come back. That's the wonderful thing that I had. It was a great blessing. But not just that. So I got flexibility, I got a balance. What else did I got? I got time to rethink about my career. You know, when you hit with something that hard, or when something touch you so hard, you start to think, you know, this thing's not going to change. What should I do forward? So it makes me think a lot that if I can do this, work smarter, put things in place, maybe there's something else that I could do to make things work for me even better than before. Not struggling, not managing, but thriving. And that set me on a different thought process and approach, and eventually bring me to where am I today. I took work from home, I took a break, and I took a new role as well. So with whole thing itself, it starts you on the journey, you know, and work on that. I got a new role and early this year, which is where am I now. That's a career progression for me. And on top of that, I also learned to work smarter and get myself involved with other cause than was work. I'm now the co-chair for Women of Ericsson, an employer resource group. So there am I, not just work, but work with
Wonderfully
meaning.
inspiring story. Thank you, Ivy. And thank you for sharing a rather very personal story here today. I think it is quite inspiring for those in the audience. And for me, a couple of things stood out. One is Ericsson did kind of work with you and offer you what works best for you in terms of flexibility and balance, but also it didn't limit your career opportunities. It actually expanded your career opportunities. So for those in the audience who are wondering, asking for flexibility, how is that going to impact me? How is that going to impact my career? That's a great example of how it didn't. Andrew,
Yeah.
Lakshmi. Oh, sorry, go on, Ivy. Was there more? Yeah, go on.
Sorry, no, I was writing on that part. Some the story is over, but I guess it's very important that we think about what we want and not be afraid to explore it. It might not happen tomorrow. So all this thing doesn't happen in the daytime, or after after this webinar, suddenly everything becomes brighter. There is a journey there, but we need to start thinking about that and have the courage and the bravery to start asking and shaping it up till where we want to be. So I thought that was a very important thing to note of.
I can already see some comments in response to your story, Ivy. So it sounds like it's really resonated with the audience. Wonderful. Andrew, Lakshmi, anything more to add from you?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of points on Ivy's story. I think it is a very, I think, courageous position that she had to take. She had to make a decision and she prioritized that. But I think the positive side of that is that she did also communicate that, right? So that the team around her and the broader organization understood, and they took those measures, and then she knew what she had to do, and she didn't feel guilty to do that. And she did take a risk. As part of the way that she handled that, it actually did enable her to move on, to, I think, look beyond that time, those challenges. And really, it's very happy to see. I mean, I knew Ivy before that time and now, and she's an amazingly different person despite the challenges she's had. So it has been a very positive and inspiring time to even watch her do that through that. So it's not just inspiring for her and what she's done, but also for those of us around who have seen her really make this transition and see how the organization has also supported that. So it's been a really positive thing. So on the other side, and we sort of talked a little bit about the differences that we see. There is one difference, and you talked, the traditional roles in the family and things. That I am seeing now with this, obviously the flexibility that's enforced, that people are working from home, they are spending a lot more time with their families, right? And interestingly, like Ivy mentioned, she's spending more time with her kids, they're growing up. I'm having a lot more discussions, not necessarily with the ladies and the mothers of the group, but with the men, and about dealing with these family issues, children, school pickups, giving them time so that they can balance homework and things which were never ever part of the discussions earlier. So I think there's been a shift also in the communication, the style, and the ability for not just flexibility, but an understanding that everyone has to do things differently, and now they're speaking differently, they're communicating differently, they're asking for help in different ways. Like, for example, I hear a lot more, I won't say complaints, requests for support or requests for flexibility from my male teams and colleagues to help to cope with the multitasking, right? I don't get so many queries on multitasking from the ladies in the team, because what I'm finding is that their strengths are in this area. And so what's happened with this shift in the flexibility and, as I said, that ability to balance things, the organizational skills, the ability to multitask, and that ability to sort of, I think, take a different type of control, which is not based on, business or technology, but also on how individuals and people manage themselves in a different way. You start to see strengths arising, and sometimes it's a silent strength that comes to the fore, where I have a lot more female leaders in the organization who are stepping up and saying, these are the decisions that need to be made. This is what you need to look for. They're guiding, I would say, that more traditional counterparts in how to manage, navigate the people, the empathy, the customer, the organization, the multitasking, and all of those things. So this is a really interesting, I think, time to see where the different strengths and the sort of the diversity and then the inclusion of that into the environment. So it's well worth to sort of sit back and really reflect on, I think, that the amazing diversity of our workforce and who comes to the fore during, the challenging times. So really, really interesting.
That's a very good point, Andrew. And there's something to be said about the fact that Ericsson sort of allows those changes within the organization to organically happen, but also supports them where there is need for support. So there's a lot to be said about the organization's part in promoting that evolution or progression, which is very interesting in terms of the male and female requests that are coming through. That is one to reflect on, indeed.
Yeah, it's starting to challenge a little bit the traditional roles,
Yes.
which is, I think, is a very positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But maybe we can sort of hear a little bit from you, from your perspective. We talked a lot about individuals and having, communication and thinking about what the journey is. But from your perspective, you look at it from the perspective of, as a leadership team, as managers, and particularly speaking to the managers in the audience, what should they do? What should they be looking out for in order to provide that safe space to have those conversations around flexibility in the workplace?
So let me just tell you something that happened. So I'm not sure if you guys know about this, but then India was pretty badly hit by the second wave of COVID. So almost most of the members on my team were either infected or had someone who was very close to them um, being infected, and it was a scary time for all of us because we were concerned about their well-being and their health. But it was we also didn't want it to impact the daily operations. We didn't want it to have to impact the business, and we were trying to figure out a solution to somehow sort this out. And I was just so inspired by how well the team sort of handled it and the leadership handled it. People stepped up. People were sharing their workload. Even the leadership was checking in on all these people, on all the teammates who were impacted, making sure that they had everything, talking to the family. It was like we were a part of their extended family. So I think I was just so inspired that this was the kind of culture that's ingrained in the organization, that people were empowered in a way that we're not alone on this, rather than, looking at any sort of like negative impact. They knew that we were there for each other and we'd support each other and get through this. So I think that sense of empathy is what the leadership should sort of inculcate in the organization.
Thank you. That's a very touching way of putting it, actually, because you're right. There's a lot of empathy involved. But Andrew, can I just flip the question over? I mean, you as the head of digital services, as a leadership in part of the leadership team at Ericsson, what do you look out for? Particular scenarios where you look out for to sort of, I guess, initiate a conversation around flexibility and balance.
I think it's if I take a different angle on this, and what Lakshmi said, it's great. She sort of sees I guess the recipient. She's a recipient of that, but there's actually a lot of planning. As I mentioned before, the strengths of our individual selves as our people, rather than a leadership position, expectation, you should do this, you should know the answers, you should make decisions. That concept of flexibility, and I think we mentioned the multitasking and even the ideas. Sometimes it's about the pull rather than the push. So for example, we have a changing situation, and immediately as a leader in the organization, either you're on top of it or you're not. And I've seen both, right? And when you're on top of it, obviously your strengths come to the fore. And sometimes those strengths are not necessarily relevant to the situation. So what Lakshmi was saying, communication, right? What was before natural for people to meet face to face, hear the information that they need to hear, address them. Now you have to reach out. Some of the challenges I see with the flexibility is that people naturally, and in our organization, we're a lot of engineers, a lot of technologists, and they're not the most extroverted of people, right? So the enforced office space and things, obviously they interact, but here they can disappear. And when they disappear, it's not that they're bad, it's not that they're wrong. It's just that level of, because of this new way of working, the flexibility that's afforded by the business, there is no rules around this. No one says you must talk to Lakshmi or Ivy, twice a week, ask them how to do this, right? So that then becomes a very personal thing, right? If I don't have a KPI to talk to this many people, would I actually do it? Where do I see that benefit? And that's where I think that shift around there. And I think from my perspective, and the challenge that I see with my leaders is that they're focused on getting the business. That's where they're driven. But how do you make sure that that business is actually the people business and supporting that flexibility, right? Because some of the challenges we had before, how do you let someone work from home? Say before pandemic, right? I have some people ask me, can I work from home? First question is why? Right. First question is why. Now, of course you can, right? Completely different response. But we need to make that shift and then allow that level of support. But then we think humanely around that. How is it that it's impacting? What is the real reason why people are asking for these things? What's the behind the stories, behind the scenes? And because we don't have face to face, how do we actually get that? So we make the right decision. So, for example, Lakshmi can enjoy that feeling of everyone working together, that we're all one big happy family. It's not always that easy. I mean, we're built up with people who don't think that way. And how is it that we make sure that if we don't address it, that it is being addressed in some other way, shape, or form? And it's not a given, to be fair. It is a challenge, and it's not something that we should be proud of, but it's something that we should be aware of in how to actually make this change happen.
Wonderfully transparent. Thank you, Andrew. That's very transparent. Ivy, I'm keen to understand if there's anything more you want to add.
Yeah, and everything Andrew says somehow seems to bring back some memory, and Lashmi as well. This is very personal. I mean, this is experience that I had. So we were talking about communication, and I think if I now look back at when the whole thing happened in detail, I recall when I first asked for the request. The 2 days work from home, I don't feel so pressured by it, but to be away for 2 months, I felt the pressure. I was really afraid. The risk was really high. Um, but I think the first step is really to speak up. You have to share with somebody. I've other work experience before that. They tell everybody except for the person that can help them. So the whole company knows that this person have issue, but not the line manager nor the management. So all the people who knows have no help, but those that can help was not being shared. So I think most importantly is don't be afraid. And when I first asked, the expression like what Andrew say, why do you need it? That can be intimidating, right? I mean, you think it's fair, but when you were being asked why, the first impression is, oh, am I in trouble? Is this not right? But if you know clearly what you need, then don't be afraid to speak factually and share, because I think it's only good for yourself and good for the company. good for yourself so that your well-being is taken care of, good for the company. Like me, I might have a downtime, but when I come up, I can be a more valuable asset to the company. So don't be afraid, step out.
That's the key tip from you. Don't be afraid and have that open communication. In relation to that, actually, interestingly, we had to have a question in the chat, and Andrew, that's, if it's all right, I'm going to just pop that question over to you. It says, as a leader, how do you create a safe space and an open door for your teams to initiate those conversations around flexibility? And I thought it's quite timely. The question popped up now.
No, it's actually very good. And it is one of those things that you, as a leader, need to sort of balance. And I have my own leaders, my direct reports, come to me and say, how do you have that conversation where you're separating work and what Ivy was saying with, I think, with the personal piece, because the flexibility requests actually are, yes, it's about work, but it's also driven from a personal perspective. So one of the challenges that I see, I reach out now down to, say, some of my engineers. I ping them. I say, hey, you want to have a chat? And I spoke to one yesterday morning, and sometimes you have to give permission. He said, oh, when you ping me, I get a bit nervous. I said, why? He says, oh, because I'm not sure if I've done something wrong. Right. I said, no, I'm just asking to find out how things are. And during the course of the conversation, when he realized he wasn't in trouble, he started to share things and say, this is what I need, and this is what I want, and these are some. And he started to open up. And at the end of the conversation, he said, actually, it's really good. Whenever I have the conversation, it starts off, I'm a bit worried that I've done something wrong, but at the end of it, I feel uplifted. So if I use that as an example, it is about just having that personal, that humane touch to reach out, and sometimes randomly, like, surprise people. Don't make it I have a scheduled once a month at this time discussion. We'll talk about these topics and then we'll move on. It's being spontaneous, it's being human, and it's saying, hey, how are you? What can I do to help? And then you see what responses you get. Some people will everything's fine, and others will really start to open up. And then when you get that open up, they then ask for things. And that's when, and that's what we have to do. Not everyone is as courageous as Ivy to ask for this. So how is it that we get them to feel comfortable to ask? And we give them almost that permission to say, it's okay, right? And I've realized, actually, as part of this pandemic thing, that I have had to, across the board, give permission unconsciously. I said, some people said, hey, can I go out? We have a call at 9 o'clock with the customer. We can't avoid it, but can I go out and do this? And I realized that, you know what, people are able to balance their time. It's out there, but they said, I'm going to stay home. I'm going to miss my girlfriend's birthday party because I'm going to stay. And that was like, you shouldn't do that. We give you the tools, the tablet, the access on your mobile. Go and take it from the restaurant. Go and take it from wherever you are. Enjoy the time that you have with your family. Use the flexibility. Don't feel constrained because it's work and life. So those kinds of things, we have to be explicit. Even if I think about it, I give people permission to take meetings whilst they're exercising. Why? Because they say, oh, boss, I've got my meeting with you now, but I usually do my run. I say, okay, let's do it together. Take your run. Obviously, if you can talk and breathe at the same time, it's okay, right? Some things is not negotiable, customer meetings and things like that, but others. But I've found it giving permission to do that and then they ask for the flexibility is one of the best ways to sort of engender that change in the way that we work. And also embodying that. Sometimes I've had meetings with external parties and it's been video, everything like that. And my youngest, she just wants to spend time with me. It's late at night. So she comes and sits on my lap and she points at the person and says, who's that man? Right? And instead of what most of us would do is like, go away, push them away, get out of my camera. I'm having a conversation. I said, okay, does everybody mind that she sits on my lap because I haven't spent time with her all day. Now, by doing that, it becomes acceptable that, you know what, we are encroaching upon each other's lives, right? And therefore other people are bringing their children. I had one of the customers bring his dog to one of the meetings. So yeah, it's a little bit, you know, how do we make it acceptable by giving that, I guess, explicit permission? Because sometimes we don't think, we say, oh, everyone can manage themselves, they can balance it themselves, but they can't because they have a preconceived notion sometimes. So hopefully that's answered in a long way some things on how we encourage flexibility by actually enabling the team to explore what they can actually do with the flexible options that we give.
Two things, Andrew. One, yes, I think it talks about, you've talked about some clear examples at Ericsson where that happens, but also what's interesting is you embodying those behaviors. When leaders tend to behave that way, I think it gives more of a courage and more of a, oh, this is acceptable behavior, and it's all right to bring my dog or my puppy or my human child, whatever it may be, to this
Yes.
meeting. And I think that's really quite interesting, and sometimes often missed from a leadership perspective. So thank you so much for sharing that.
No, that's fine. Actually, one thing just on that,
Sure.
I actually had an executive meeting with the customer and I had the video on, and my daughter, the same one, was jumping on the bed behind me. And she did it for the entire time that the meeting was there. And I got comments from the customer saying, you handled that really well, because I didn't stop. It was continued. But I said, look, this is life. I said, we just have to expect these things, all right? You're having a meeting in my bedroom now, so let's put up with it. And yeah, I mean, there was no negative responses at all. It was all, it's like, hey, that's really good. It made us feel, you know, that it was okay to do things a bit differently.
No.
Isn't it interesting? Sorry, I was just thinking that, because of this, I think Lashmi definitely can resonate with this. You know your colleagues' family. In the past, I don't know how their kids look like, how old they are, and now I kind of know how their house looks like, how their
Yeah.
car look like, because they have cars in the car. It's amazing, actually, bring people closer together if you think on the other perspective, on the bright side.
Well, all of you know my dogs. So there we go.
Yes.
There's an example.
Yes, we know you have dogs and they like to talk to us.
They like to talk to you. Yes, indeed.
Your dog
So-
agree with us.
Yeah, they agree with
They
everything
like
you
us.
say. Lakshmi, I'm keen to sort of get your voice in the room. Anything that sparked for you from that conversation?
No, I completely relate to this, and like no, as Ivy was also saying, in a way, I mean, that is an interesting take on it. You kind of see other people, their homes. Even I've had meetings where my mom's walked in with food, and they're like, "Hey, what are you having?" For lunch, and like it sparked those conversations as well. So yeah, you get to see that other side of, rather than just this person who's talking business, you get to, you know,
See the
yeah.
human being. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm quite conscious of time. I'm just going to check in very quickly if there are any other questions for the panelists in our conversation. And so far, I think we've answered those questions, but I think we'll have time for a few more questions, really. And Lakshmi, Ivy, keen to sort of hear your thoughts on this. I guess and this has come up a few times, the concept of having communication and trust between employer and employee and manager, and sometimes the reality is, can that be misused potentially? So is there value in sort of, could you share with us a little bit around, what does an employee have to do in order to understand what are they entitled to? And maybe you can share some Ericsson specific examples of, what are some of the specific well-being initiatives that promote that flexible working that is being offered currently, and how do you do that research before you ensure there is trust and have that conversation with your manager? Ivy, maybe we start with you, and then Lakshmi could add on.
Okay, that's quite a lot of questions that you were posting. I'm
That's
trying to
actually
think
true.
which one should I go.
That's
So
very
let's
true.
let's go with the communication part itself. So as I shared, when you find a need, it's very important that you articulate. As I think with my experience with Ericsson, we are a very fast-moving company. Everything we do is very business driven. So if your managers or your peers start giving you that why, it doesn't mean that they don't agree or they are not supporting. It's just that business is at risk. So you need to be able to articulate, if you leave vacant here, um, what can you do to lessen the impact, and get people to come in to support. It's not that I need to go and you just dump everything, because that's not fair. But if you do a proper handover itself, it only makes you a stronger, more valuable staff, because you're able to articulate, you're able to plan properly, and you engage the people in. So communication and planning, I think that's very important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did I miss other questions?
No,
Maybe
I
Lakshmi
think you
can.
answered. Lakshmi, maybe you and or Andrew could sort of talk us through a little bit. I'm particularly thinking about that. Was it the employee hotline at Ericsson that it was? Is there something you could share on that? Because I thought that was a really interesting um, initiative from Ericsson, bearing in mind what the purpose of that, and in the context of mental well-being and flexibility. So I don't know if Andrew or maybe you could start, and then Lakshmi could add on.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there was quite a number of well-being initiatives, right? Some are at the global level, some are much more local. And if we look at it, I think irrespective of the policies and the tools, I think it's more realistically about how we adopt them, right? And how we make use of them. Because I think in the initial stages, some of the well-being initiatives, people said, why do I need it? It was the very early days. Like, I'm not necessarily suffering. And then it's about when it's there and when it's required to give that flexibility. So it's not saying, hey, I've now got a KPI to release a wellbeing initiative. It's actually, it is there, it's available for people when they need to use it. Similar to the policies that we have, the work from home, the furniture policy, all of these things, the tools, the subscriptions, all of this is great. But if they're not using it or they don't see the need to use it, then right, it becomes a sort of more focused on how is it that we make it, how we execute on it, how we actually use these tools, these opportunities to build our, I guess, our resiliency during these difficult times. And everyone will have a different time. I mean, for example, Ivy had her challenging time. She's now in a positive time. She's probably going to need those resources differently. But it is really good to see that we have that. And that's where that flexibility comes in. It says, okay, there is, the organization recognizes it, whether we need it now or whether we need it later. But just going back to what Ivy said, I think if I look at it, and it's a very personal view. So as an individual, an organization, I'm requesting flexibility. As a manager, you look at work from home. It's a minefield, to be fair, and it's not like Ivy says. You get asked why, but it's not because I don't trust you. But there are instances and examples where flexibility is abused, taken advantage of. I mean, in the past, when I came from Australia, sorry to all the Australians, when someone asked me to they were working from home today, and I hear seagulls and the ocean in the background, I know they're not working from home. So, maybe
They are
that has.
inspired and work better with the seagull.
Yeah, maybe that's the good story, and that's the why. But as a manager, how do you navigate this? Because it's not just that individual who you think is not doing it. I then have calls from others saying, hey, you let X, Y, and Z work from home, but I know they're not doing their job because they didn't deliver on this and they're at the beach today. And then that fairness as a manager, how do you differentiate between all of that? So it's not about, and everyone personalizes this. So you get a lot of unhappy people when you say, hey, please justify this, because it seems like there's no trust.
Yeah.
But actually, it's a difficult challenge. And then what Ivy said, communicate, be courageous, tell them why. It's not because they're being nosy, it's because actually they need to be able to understand.
That's a very good point, and that's specifically to the managers and the audience and the difficulty on navigating. I'm conscious of time. Was there any last comments from anyone at this stage? Any final words of wisdom?
Hey, Meta, it's Jess.
Yes.
There's a couple of questions in the
Okay.
conversation box.
Oh, lovely. Okay, let me read that out. So we've got Maru has asked, would you be interested in measuring productivity in a more standard way via the system that could link? And apologies, Jess, I can't seem to read the rest of that message.
Yeah, sure. Let me read the full question. Would you be interested in measuring productivity in a more standard way via a system that could link the performance, objectives, and hours spent?
Very tactical question. Who would like to do
I,
that
I
one?
might,
Andrew, Andrew, would you
might-
be interested, Andrew?
I might answer that. It's one of those double-edged swords. But it has been something that I've been interested in because I'm not sure we use some of the Microsoft products, and they provide statistics on, how much time you spend collaborating, how much time you're spending inside hours, outside hours working, and things like that. And I think it was very useful, at least personally for me, because I wanted to just get a feeling of how much time I spent personally, and then what it is I could potentially do to improve that. But it was a little bit depressing in some ways, because when I get the reports, I look at it and it says, in the last month, you have spent, of the 28 days, 0 days where you have not done work. I was like, okay, now I look at that retrospective and said, that's not right. During the period, I didn't think about that. And then to compound that, it said, and during this time, you've made 15 other people work 24 hours extra this month outside of hours. And I was like, oh, that's not right. So I think it is, but the purpose of measurement needs to be really clear, right? If it's to help and improve the well-being, yes. If it's to monitor and measure, I would question that perhaps it becomes a little bit too far. So I personally, as a leader in the organization, would look to see how we can improve things because of this information. Because I don't know if someone's working 24 hours a day, unless I talk to them and they say, hey, boss, I'm going to go to hospital next week because I'm collapsing. But if I knew that was happening beforehand, yes, we could take corrective action or things like that. Because as I said, sometimes they don't communicate, they just work. So it would be useful in some, and in other ways it can be quite destructive. So, but it's a very good question.
It's a very good question indeed. I'm really conscious of time. We are at the top of the hour. So I just want to take this time to the last minute or so to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. And personally, I feel this was a very rich, very transparent and productive session. So thank you, Lakshmi, Andrew, and Ivy for taking the time today, for sharing some very personal experiences and tips on what's worked and what hasn't worked. I'm sure the audience resonates with a lot of what you've shared. And to the audience, before we end, I want to sort of recap some of the themes, some of the tips that we've discussed around flexibility or negotiating flexibility in the workplace. Number one is to remember that it is not gender specific, and the reasons for asking for flexibility can be quite varied and they're all quite valid. The key thing is to have trust and communication. Number two, do your research. Know what you're entitled to before initiating a conversation with your manager. I think that always helps with the actual conversation, as Ivy's talked about from her experiences. And for managers in the audience, Andrew's mentioned this a few times, look for signs, be proactive. I do like the example, Andrew, about reaching out ad hoc to the engineers. Yes, the initial 5 minutes is a little bit more, and they're a little bit more suspicious, but then over time, they realize this is you checking in. And I think that's a great way to sort of establish that relationship, an open, safe environment, and initiate conversations. And then, of course, there is an element of emotions that sit behind it when you are having challenging conversations, and if you're deciding whether to offer flexibility and why, and managers navigating through that. So to the audience, I would say be kind to yourself, and that's a theme we've heard. Allow yourself space and time to manage those emotions. And lastly, as shared by the panelists, and Lakshmi's brought it in as well, the initiatives introduced by Ericsson are examples of some of the commitment really, the resources and care that really goes into supporting a flexible workplace for all.
Again, thank you so much for the authentic sharing and insightful tips from the speakers at Ericsson today. And please check out their social media pages for upcoming news and job opportunities at Ericsson. Stay safe, everybody, and take care.